Right, I'm introducing video 3.5. This will be a fairly long video. This is a lot of information in this particular unit. Okay, let's introduce the idea of firm. Well, a business is called a firm. It could be called an enterprise. It could be called a company. It can also be referred to as an organization or institution, depending on what the business is. Okay, we're going to take a little time to look at how businesses can be. Well, businesses can be private sector or they could be public sector. In the private sector, you can have the sole proprietor. This is a one-man firm. You can have the partnership. Then you get the private limited company and the public limited companies. Now, these two could be multinational corporations. And then you will get a form in the private sector called the cooperative. Now, the public sector, these are owned and managed by the government. They can also be called SOEs, state-operated enterprises. Okay, so as we mentioned before, we can distinguish between different firms by the industrial sector they operate, whether they are in the private sector or whether they are state-owned enterprises. Another way we can distinguish is by the size of the firm or the scale of its production. The concept of economic sector, which can also be referred to as industrial sector. We've got three. We've got the primary sector. This is production or extraction of natural resources. Examples can be farming, forestry, fishing, mining, quarrying, or the oil and gas extraction. Quarrying is the mining of stone. Then you've got the secondary sector. These are involved in manufacturing or assembling. Examples are the many factories and the construction. It's wise to take a look at your textbook here because there are quite a number of examples, but they will either be in the form of some kind of manufacturing or construction. The tertiary sector, this is the sector that has all our services: retail, transport, banking and insurance, restaurants. Again, many examples here. Okay, let's have a little look at the sole proprietor. It's owned by a single individual. The partnership is owned by two or more individuals. Now, the problem here is they've got something called unlimited liability. This would mean that if the company fell into debt for whatever reason and could not pay it, then the people owed the money can claim it from the household of in the case of sole proprietor, the owner, or in partnership, they could follow up and try and get the money from any or all of the partners. Now, these guys have the aim of earning profit and can employ any number of workers. I'm moving relatively quickly through these, so if you want, you can stop and replay. Now, for the sole proprietor, there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is it's relatively easy to set up. The owner has complete control. The owner can keep all the profits. The owner can choose their times and patterns of working, and they get to establish close personal relationships with staff and customers. The disadvantage. Well, first disadvantage is this idea of unlimited liability. All of the owner's assets are potentially at risk. They can often face intense competition from bigger firms, especially in, for example, food retailing. The owner cannot have all skills of business and management. The owner might be good at production, but not so good at accounting, or could be good at human relation, but maybe not so good at marketing. It's difficult to raise additional capital, and there's a lack of continuity. If the owner dies, well, then the business must fold. An example of intense competition from bigger firms would be supermarkets like Lidl, making it difficult for bakeries and butchers to compete with them in terms of price. We are exploring advantages and disadvantages, this time the partnership. Well, advantages are similar. It's easy to set up. The advantage with the partnership, though, is that the partners can specialize in different areas of the management of the business. Um, they have shared decision making. Additional capital can be injected by each partner, and any losses the business makes are shared between the partners. Disadvantages. Well, again, unlimited liability. The profits must be shared. Again, a certain lack of continuity. If one of the partners dies, in many cases, the partnership might need to be reformed. All partners are bound by the decision of any one of them, and it's not possible to raise additional capital through the selling of shares. Please excuse the spell mistake on all partners. It should be ALL. Taking a look at the private limited company and the public limited company. Now, the private limited company has a limited availability of finance. The public limited company, if you remember when we looked at shares, a public limited company can sell millions of shares and, well, literally as many as it wants, and for the sale of the shares can quickly bring in finance. They have limited liability. This means that if the business owes money and cannot pay it, that's not the problem of the shareholders. Well, not necessarily the problem, but they can't follow up on the shareholders. So if I were to buy shares in Coca-Cola or shares in Mercedes, and these companies fall into debt, okay, my example is possibly not the best, but if they do fall into debt, then I would lose my investment, but nobody could come knocking on my door and saying, Coca-Cola has failed, it owes millions, and now you must pay some of that money, because there is limited liability. It's wise to look up the definition of limited liability. They have a legal personality. So the law classes Coca-Cola as a person, yeah, not a natural person, but in terms of the law, Coca-Cola can enter into contracts and literally can carry on forever. So there's no problem like with a partnership and with the sole trader. If someone were to die, that could be the end of the business. With the public limited company or private limited company, the companies can keep going on and on and on. The capital is divided into shares. The private limited company cannot sell to the general public, but the public limited company can sell to the general public on the stock exchange. That's what we looked at earlier in the year, so please recap on stock exchange. The business continues in the event of death. In the private limited company, the shareholder or shareholders are directors who run the business. In the public limited company, the shareholders are elected to a board of directors who will run the business. Okay, the cooperatives. This is a business organization jointly owned by its members and especially in agriculture, retailing, and housing. The main aim is to help both the buyers and producers of the product. So the members buy in bulk, so are able to get a lesser price. All members share the workload, responsibilities, and decision making. However, that can be slow. All members have one vote at important meetings, and profits are shared equally amongst the members. You can see in North America, you sometimes get dairy cooperatives. The co-op retail store in the UK was formed as a cooperative. Um, you have to look because there are not too many examples of the form of ownership cooperative, but have a little Google search at some time and see if you can find some cooperatives. Okay, the state-owned enterprise, which can also be referred to as the public corporation. Now, the public sector is made up of organizations which are owned and controlled by central or local government. They are funded and managed by the government. The main aim is to work in the interest of public. They can be involved in the production of merit goods, public hospitals, schools, universities, libraries, or basic needs like electricity, water, and railway transport. In Germany, the Deutsche Bahn is a state-owned enterprise or state-run enterprise. The multinational companies, well, the best way is to think of examples. For example, Volkswagen works all around the world with factories around the world and selling around the world. Ford also would be multinational. If I look at various products, I might find that some are from Unilever. Unilever makes shampoos. In Germany, they make Douche Dash. They also own the Magnum ice cream and various things like that. So, multinational companies are all around the world. The advantage of a multinational company is they introduce new technology, management skills, they generate jobs, they produce tax revenue for their host countries, and they give much of consumer choice. So I often look at shampoos. I've got Head and Shoulders, believe it or not, at home, and if I read, I can find out who it's made by. I know off the top of my head that my douche dash is made by Unilever. Next time you're washing your hair, take a look and see who makes your favorite of shampoo. And there's a possibility that it is perhaps made by a multinational company. Now, what are the disadvantages of the MNCs? Well, the profits can be returned back to the home country. And it can have an effect on domestic business, which might find it difficult to compete with the big multinational companies. The relative size of firms. How do we measure the relative size of firms? Well, we could look at the number of employees. A factory might have upwards of 500 employees, where a small shop or bakery might have 4 or 5. The organization of the firm. Coca-Cola has many locations across the world, many regions, many layers of management. Some firms might just have one market, some marketing manager, whereas Coca-Cola will have many, many layers of head of marketing, various marketing managers under them, perhaps many trainee managers under them in the field of marketing. Capital employed, the amount of money that the firm can spend on machinery, factories, etc. And a good measurement of relative size is the market share. How much of the market is controlled by that particular firm? If you come across the term privatization, this is the process of transferring ownership from the public sector to the private sector. So when governments will sell off, I think British Airways, I must check. In fact, I will check. Please check with me. Has British Airways been privatized? Have a look at your home country and see if you can find 3 examples of firms that used to be government controlled, government owned, that were privatized. Reasons why privatization may happen. Well, state firms can be inefficient. State firms can be a financial burden on the government. And by selling off these state firms, it raises valuable money for the government. However, once privatized, the company may increase the prices. They may cut jobs, they may reduce the scope of services, and especially get rid of services that are not profitable. So small firms, why might they remain small? Well, it could be the size of the market is small. It could be that the access to capital is limited. It could be that new technology has reduced the scale of production needed, or the business owner may choose to remain small. So looking at small firms, advantages and disadvantages. Well, let's look at the advantages. There's fewer legal requirements to set up. You could run from home or small premises. The owner has control of decision making. The owner can be in close contact with the customers. The owner can be in close contact with employees. They're able to change production processes and products more easily as less capital is invested in specific machines and premises. Some of the disadvantages, well, let's start from the bottom now. They usually cannot afford specialist staff or specialist machinery and equipment. Small firms find it more difficult to buy in bulk. It's more difficult to raise capital. Small firms face a lot of competition. Small firms lack financial resources, and the owner may find it necessary to work long hours. The owner might not have the skills or the time to manage all the aspects of the business. For example, could be good at production management, but not so good at sales, or may not have the time to do the role because they have to manage the other roles as well. Well, not much to say here. It's quite obvious. Growth of firm. It's the ability of a firm to scale up, grow bigger, expand their business over a period of time. How can growth occur? Well, you can see growth could be internally, internal growth. Growth could be externally, or growth could be international. I'll have a little look in more depth in a while. Okay, so internal growth. You might hear the term plow back. The firm takes its profits, maybe all the profits, or maybe just some of the profits, and they invest them into the business to allow the business to grow. They could also take private funds and invest them in the business to allow it to grow. External growth. Now, this is very interesting. It could be called integration. Now, there's 2 ways that it could happen. It could be takeover. So I see another competitor and I buy them out. I take over their operations. Or it could be mergers. 2 competing companies in an industry may start negotiating with each other to merge, to become one business. You will often find Procter and Gamble. There's various of names that are joining of existing companies. So now my types of integration, they could be horizontal, And here I get economies of scale and a large market share. So horizontal is when I buy a competing or merge with a competing a company. Um, Vertical integration, this could be backward or it could be forward. I'll take an example of Coca-Cola in South Africa. They mm, bought out a canning company. So that's vertical integration backwards. They now have the control of the cans needed to be made so that the Coca-Cola can be canned. Forward vertical is where we capture a retail market. So I, maybe I'm a clothing manufacturer, I start to buy shops so that I can sell my goods direct to the public. So I control. With sunglasses, there's a very big firm called Luxottica, and if you were to search on the internet, you will find that they not only manufacture various of sunglasses, but they control many of the optometrists that sell the particular sunglasses and glasses. Now, there is another way of merger, which is called lateral or conglomerate. Now, in this case, it's not taking over your competitors per se, it's taking over other industries. So you've got a diversified portfolio. If you think of PepsiCo, PepsiCo bought out different types of soft drinks. They have their Mountain Dew, they have their Pepsi, they have things like Miranda. But PepsiCo also did buy out people who make things like chips. Crisps, depending on what you call them, things like Lay's, the potato chips. Interesting to look at is to go online and go into PepsiCo and see what kind of things they are producing and selling. Very interesting. Right, so international growth. Well, coming from the domestic market to other countries. Why? To expand into new markets, to achieve economies of scale. We're going to look at economies of scale later. To access more good materials, technology, patents, and management techniques. To spread the risk, to decrease the cost of labor, and we associated with this the idea of the multinational companies. For example, a lot of the Italian fashion brands will manufacture their clothes in places like China and other countries in the Far East to reduce costs. They will also sell across the globe. Okay, the idea of economies of scale. As we grow, our costs, our average costs go down. For example, if I have a small bakery or if I wanted to make a lemonade at home, if I want to make some lemonade, I'd be buying my sugar at the supermarket. And the price per kilo that I pay would be much more than Coca-Cola pays, because Coca-Cola will be using tons and tons, literally tons of sugar and would get a good price when it comes to buying sugar. Now, your economies of scale, they can take place internally, internal economies of scale, or they can be external economies of scale. Now, there will become a size where your average costs start to go up again. And this is the concept of diseconomies of scale. These can be internal and these can be external. Again, we'll have a little look at these in more detail soon. Okay, so as the output increases, the unit cost decreases, and this is called the concept of economies of scale. So you can imagine if I opened a factory and we didn't produce anything, then I would pay the salary of the managers, the salary of the workers, and other fixed costs like the rent, etc., etc. Now, as we produce, as the output goes up, if the rental was say 2,000 and I sell 200 units, the rental is pretty high. But imagine if you're selling some 2-3 million of units, then the rental of 2,000 is not so big. So as we are increasing in scale, when I come to my transportation, I'm not sending out three or having to go to the post office to send things. I can have my own trucks and I can fill them with whatever I've got when I'm coming to buying, because I'm making a lot of things. Take the example again of Coca-Cola. When I come to buying sugar, I will get a better price for it and thus reduce my average cost. Now, diseconomies of scale is when the firm becomes, let's say, too large, if there is such a thing, and then your long run average costs start to rise again. All right, a quick diagram here. As you can see where the arrow is, if I'm going towards the y-axis, the cost axis, when I'm not producing a lot of things, my cost is high. But as I start to buy more of units, my average cost will go down. This is one to hold in the back of your mind, because later on, in fact, the next unit, we'll be starting looking at firms' productions, firms' costs, revenues, and objectives, and we'll actually start defining and working with the numbers, and then it will become obvious as to how the average costs drop when more is produced. Okay, the internal economies of scale. When a company grows large, there are benefits to the firm of reduced costs and increased productivity. Um, I'm looking at an empty classroom, yeah, because you're all at home. Some schools will be much bigger than this one. So one teacher may be able to teach 3 or 4 classes, yeah, as in classes of say 25. So that means that the cost per teacher reduces. In a factory, if I have to employ one worker and that one worker has to go and fetch the materials, and that one worker has to do the production, maybe the sweeping, maybe the trimming, maybe the packaging. They're not going to get so much um, done in a day, and the costs will be relatively high and the productivity would be relatively low. But imagine for every extra worker we get, we can push the output, and one worker might be specialized in sweeping. Again, we looked earlier on at the idea of division of labor and specialization. And as I get a specialist sweeper, they become much better at sweeping. And the person who is making of the things can concentrate on one job and become much more efficient. And then the person who is packaging, all they have to do is package, and then we could produce more, and the average costs would go down. Right, some examples that go with internal economies of scale. Well, we can get technical economies. As the firm grows, it can use more advanced technology, and the average cost goes down. We can get purchasing economies. I mentioned the idea of sugar and the soft drink manufacturers. We can get marketing economies. It may be possible to use the same advert on many, many newspapers, TVs for some of the multinationals around the world. We'll get some economies when we're selling things. The shipping cost for large volumes is less. We'll get managerial economies because we'll be able to get the specialist experts in the various departments. We'll get financial economies because if I'm a big company, it will be easier and probably cheaper to take loans or raise funds. Okay, the idea of external economies of scale. When the company grows large, it benefits other firms and the industry. So you'll find a lot of the times car manufacturers, they're going to be localized. There's various places in Germany that make certain types of cars. I think it's Bochum, Bochum, and if you drive past Dusseldorf and you're heading towards the Netherlands, you will see many off ramps that go to factories that do to work with Opel, the Opel car, and around there will be other companies that are maybe providing the windscreens, providing the tires, providing the wheels. When I left university, I worked for a place called AutoCast, and they were a foundry, and one of the things that they cast was disc brakes for BMW, and they weren't far from the BMW plant north of Pretoria. So certain of areas, the fact that a company is large, then other firms in the area will also benefit and perhaps become larger themselves too. Okay, so the benefits associated with the external economies of scale. Well, workers may be trained by other firms, and there is a pool of skilled labor. There's the chance to diversify your investments and conglomerate with other companies. If you don't know what conglomerate is, then bounce back a few slides and watch the merger slides again. You can have your specialist suppliers, very much like the example I just gave of tires for the automobile industry. You can have specialized services, for example, transport or training can take place near the big companies. Um, and then you have the benefit of research and development done by other firms so that you can take advantage of general research and development in the industry. Okay, running through the idea of the diseconomy of scale. When a company grows large, the disadvantages to the firm, for example, inefficient management, difficult to monitor productivity, difficulty of controlling quality, and increased costs, maybe if as you spread across the globe, can lead to internal diseconomies of scale. It becomes difficult to manage the firm because of the many branches and the many different managers and many different specialists. It may respond slowly to changes in market conditions. There could be poor communication. There may be a necessity for many of meetings, and it might take a long time for the information to pass along all the firms that are in, say, a multinational. There could be poor relation with the workforce. And as we are working in many different countries, as we've expanded, there could be less motivation and the risk of strike could become greater. Since we've done trade unions, the trade unions, you may have to negotiate with many different trade unions throughout the world. Now, the idea of external diseconomies of scale is when the company grows large, the disadvantages to other firms and to the industry are called external diseconomies of scale. There could be a shortage of land. The shortage of land would lead to increased costs. There could become the shortage of skilled labor, which leads to increased costs. And you can get traffic congestion. I don't know in geography if you do business areas, sometimes by freeways. There'll be like little areas where various business industrial areas are, and invariably there's a lot of traffic jams leading to these places. Also, if you think of the banking industry, all the banks like to be in the center of a town, for example, Frankfurt or London, and around that area, the costs of rental would rise.